When my parents threw my things on the lawn and gave my room to my sister's kids, so I smiled, because they had no idea about my secret. 2 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was 31, comfortably living in a one-bedroom apartment just outside Milwaukee, working as a back-end developer for a mid-sized tech firm. My rent was manageable, my job was stable, and I had just started taking cooking classes for fun. Life was quiet, predictable, and for the most part, exactly how I wanted it. Then one Thursday evening, I got the kind of call that makes your stomach twist before you even pick up. It was my mom, and the moment I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. She sounded worn out, strained like she'd been crying, but was trying to hold it together for just a few more minutes. "Cassidy," she said, "your dad and I need to talk. Can you come home tonight?" I left work early and drove the 2.5 hours to St. Cloud, Minnesota, the small town where I grew up and where my parents still lived in the same house they'd bought when I was 9. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the sun had dipped low, and the porch light was flickering in that sad, neglected way that things do when life has gotten too heavy for upkeep. Inside, the kitchen table was covered in papers. Mortgage documents, medical bills, job applications, pages spread out like a visual manifestation of quiet desperation. My dad looked like he had aged 10 years since I saw him last. His hands, once calloused and steady, were shaking as he flipped through the papers. My mom was rubbing her wrists like she always did when she was stressed, something she'd done since I was a kid. "What's going on?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling I didn't want the answer to. Dad cleared his throat and didn't meet my eyes. "I had to quit last month," he said. "My back. It's just not holding up anymore." I blinked. "What do you mean, quit? I thought you were just on leave." "No," he said, quieter this time. "I can't do the construction anymore. Not with the pain. I've been looking for something else, but nothing pays enough." That was when Mom stepped in, voice thin and almost apologetic. "We're barely pulling in $950 a month between my hours at the market and your father's disability paperwork still being processed. But the mortgage alone is $1,650. They looked at me, not pleading exactly, but there was something in their faces that told me they had already rehearsed this moment 100 times in their heads. They weren't proud of asking, but they were desperate. "We don't want to lose the house," Mom said. "Not after everything." The kitchen hadn't changed in decades. Same scratch table, same pale green cupboards. I glanced into the living room, remembering movie nights with bowls of popcorn and cheap soda, the time Dad helped me build a cardboard rocket ship. And when I cried at 12 because I didn't get a solo in choir and Mom made me her chocolate chip pancakes to make it better. I had no real attachment to the town, but that house was stitched into my memory. Of course, I said yes. I packed up my apartment over the weekend and moved back into the bedroom I hadn't slept in since college. The walls were still painted that pale lavender shade I'd picked out when I was 14, and my old corkboard still had faded notes and Polaroids pinned to it. At first, it felt like I was visiting some alternate version of myself, one who hadn't grown up and moved out, one who hadn't built a career in tech or learned how to make spicy Thai noodles from scratch. But I adjusted. I moved my work setup into the corner, brought in a better chair, and made sure the Wi-Fi was solid enough for video calls. Most of my job was remote, and my company didn't care where I worked, as long as I delivered. I was making $72,000 a year in salary, and with some careful budgeting, I managed to stretch that across the mortgage, the utilities, groceries, my car insurance, and enough to keep my parents comfortable. They never asked for more than that, and I never offered. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that my real income was significantly higher. My salary was only one part of the picture. Every time one of my back-end scripts got licensed out to a bigger company, I received a bonus. Sometimes it was $3,000. Sometimes it was more like $14,000. One particularly good month had landed me just under $18,000. And every cent of that bonus money went into a separate savings account. I never told my parents about it. I never told my older brother, Kyle, either, even though he called every couple of weeks asking to borrow money for just a little while. It wasn't that I didn't love my family. I did. But I knew exactly what would happen if they found out how much I was really making. Suddenly, it wouldn't just be about helping out with the mortgage. It would be new cleats for Kyle's son, a new kitchen counter for his wife, Tiffany, or or a temporary loan to cover something for their house that I would never see again. So I kept quiet. I let them think I was just scraping by. Meanwhile, that hidden account grew like a secret garden. After 2 years, I had saved nearly $190,000. I didn't have a set plan for the money at first, but the more time I spent in that old house, the more clear it became I wanted my own place again. A space that was entirely mine. No shouting children. No passive-aggressive family dinners. No one dropping by my room uninvited. I dreamed of floor-to-ceiling windows and a door that locked and stayed locked. But back then, I still thought I had time. I thought I could ride things out until I hit a nice even number in savings, maybe $225,000, and then quietly vanish back into independence. I was wrong. And the first sign of what was coming showed up, as it so often does, on a Sunday. Every Sunday, like clockwork, Kyle and Tiffany would pull into the driveway in their dinted SUV. Their 2 kids, Brody and Olivia, would spill out of the back seat like miniature tornadoes, Brody with muddy sneakers and a plastic sword, Olivia with a glitter-covered backpack she never actually opened. At first, I thought it was nice. I hadn't spent much time with them in years, and I figured some noisy family dinners might break up the monotony. That optimism didn't last long. Tiffany had a way of making every conversation feel like a performance review I hadn't prepared for. She'd walk in like a pageant queen, kiss my mom on the cheek, and immediately start judging everything in sight. The moment her eyes landed on me, it began. "Oh, Cassidy," she'd say, eyes scanning me like a scanner looking for viruses. "Is that the same hoodie from last week? You know, there are sales going on." I would usually pretend not to hear her, mutter something like "it's comfortable," and head for my room as soon as dinner was over. But she'd always find a way to get in a final jab before I made my escape. "It's just that a woman your age should care about presentation," she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes. "You're not in college anymore." Kyle would just laugh like she'd told the funniest joke in the world. "She's trying to help you, sis. She knows about fashion." Sure, she knew about fashion. I knew because she'd parade around the house in her new designer tops and luxury handbags, talking about how you get what you pay for. All of it bought with money Kyle had borrowed from me months ago and never mentioned again. I bit my tongue. Every single time. I told myself it didn't matter. I was building something bigger than a handbag or a blouse. I had almost 200 grand saved, a growing portfolio of contract projects, and a timeline for leaving this chaos behind. I just had to survive a few more months of Sunday dinners and Tiffany's cutting remarks. It was always Sunday that reminded me I was only a guest in my childhood home. The rest of the week was peaceful in its own way. I'd wake up early, make coffee in the quiet kitchen, and start working before the sun fully crested the trees outside. My parents weren't morning people anymore. My dad would shuffle into the living room, turn on the news, and sit with his heating pad, while Mom read the newspaper with her glasses sliding down her nose. Evenings were the best part, just the 3 of us eating dinner together like nothing had changed. They'd ask about my work, and I'd share the sanitized versions of my projects. I never talked about the bonuses or the clients from Silicon Valley who'd started asking for custom code. That part stayed in the shadows, untouched. But Sunday broke the illusion every time. Tiffany didn't just visit. She took over. She'd sit in the recliner like it was her throne, flip through fashion magazines she brought in her bag, and ask my mom pointed questions like, "Have you ever considered switching to organic produce? There's a lot of pesticides in this town stuff." Mom would nod politely, pretending to agree, even though we could barely afford regular groceries, let alone farm-to-table artisan mushrooms. Kyle and Dad would sit in the kitchen talking about whatever game was on or whatever coworker Kyle had butted heads with that week. I knew those stories too well. He always played the victim, never mentioned the times he was late, distracted, or just didn't show up. Every new job was the same. Enthusiasm, excuses, then silence. What made it worse was when Tiffany turned the conversation on me. "You know, Cassidy, you should start dating," she said one evening while filing her nails at the dinner table. "You're in your 30s. Don't you want kids?" I almost choked on my spaghetti. "I'm good," I said, keeping my voice even. She gave me a look that was somehow both condescending and concerned. "It's just, you're not getting younger. And working from home all the time? That's not healthy. You need balance." I have balance, I replied. I just don't need to post about it on Instagram. That one landed. She didn't say anything for a second, just raised her eyebrows and went back to her nails. I didn't dislike kids. I didn't even hate Kyle or Tiffany. I just hated the way they acted like I was some broken toy they could fix with unsolicited advice and fake compliments. Like my decision to live simply and save money made me a case study for their pity. But the thing is, it wasn't really about the comments. Not entirely. It was about control. Every Sunday felt like they were testing the boundaries of what they could say, what they could demand, and how far I'd been before I finally snapped. And they were getting bolder each week. The moment everything shifted happened so quickly, it still feels like a bad dream when I think about it. I had gone away for the weekend to visit Shayna, my closest friend since college. She'd moved to a small town with a huge backyard and a dog named Rocket who loved everyone more than life itself. I needed the break. I needed clean air, silence, and hours of doing absolutely nothing. When I came home Sunday night, something felt off the moment I turned into the driveway. There were too many cars. The lights were on in every room. And there were toys, actual toys, scattered across the porch like someone had shaken a daycare center and dumped the contents at our front door. I dragged my overnight bag up the steps, heart starting to race, and opened the door. Chaos. Kids screaming, boxes everywhere. My dad holding a toolbox while Kyle carried something that looked suspiciously like my desk chair up the stairs. Tiffany was standing in the hallway, arms crossed like a queen surveying her new kingdom. What the hell is going on? I asked, not even trying to hide the shock in my voice. Everyone froze. My mom came out of the kitchen looking like she'd been caught cheating on a test. My dad avoided my eyes. Kyle looked up from the stairs and gave me a sheepish wave. "Hey sis," he said. So, slight change of plans. I stared at the boxes. "You're moving in?" "Just for a while," Kyle said quickly. "I lost my job. We couldn't make rent." Tiffany stepped forward, still smiling like she was hosting a home renovation show. "We're so grateful for your generosity. The kids really need stability right now." She looked over her shoulder and pointed down the hall. "We've already moved the bunk beds into your room. Thought it'd be best for the kids to have a door they can close. You can take the small room at the end of the hall. We've already cleaned it up for you." I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the hallway, then at my parents, then back at Tiffany. "I work from home," I said slowly. "My setup is in that room. I need good lighting. I need a stable internet connection." Tiffany's smile thinned. "Well, the children's needs come first. They need a safe, quiet place to sleep. And I need a safe, quiet place to earn the money that pays the bills," I said, my voice sharpening. Kyle stepped in. "Look, we're not trying to cause problems. This is just temporary." "That's what you said the last 3 times you borrowed money," I replied. My mom opened her mouth, then closed it again. My dad looked at the floor. I took a breath, tried to keep my voice even. "I'm not moving out of my room." Tiffany crossed her arms. "Then I guess you're choosing work over family." "No," I said. "I'm choosing survival over entitlement." She didn't respond. No one did. I went upstairs and locked the door to my room. I leaned against it, closed my eyes, and listened to the chaos erupting in the hallway behind me. I knew right then and there, whatever this was, it wasn't temporary. It was an invasion. After that night, nothing was ever quiet again. Brody and Olivia turned the house into a battleground, sprinting from room to room with shrieks that rattled the windows and left muddy footprints on every surface. My once orderly routine disintegrated into chaos. Every morning, I braced myself for the noise, for the thudding footsteps outside my door, for the sound of Brody hurling toys at the walls or Olivia singing at full volume in the hallway while I was trying to review code. Work became a nightmare. I tried to focus on a client's database issue while Brody pounded a ball against the wall just inches from my desk. I'd be in a Zoom meeting with a lead developer when Olivia would burst into the room to ask if I had any candy. The interruptions weren't occasional, they were constant. Tiffany brushed it off every single time. "They're just energetic," she'd say with a sugary tone, as if that excused everything. I tried speaking to Kyle. "Can you please ask them not to play near my room during my work hours?" I said one morning after a particularly painful conference call where I'd been forced to mute myself while my client listened to shrieking in the background. "They're just being kids," he said without looking up from his phone. You don't get it. You don't have any. I swallowed hard, clenching my jaw to keep from snapping. I tried again with my parents, hoping they'd understand. You're overreacting, honey, my mom said with a tight smile. They're children, not robots. I'm not asking for silence, I replied. Just enough quiet that I can keep the job that's currently paying for this entire household. They exchanged glances, but neither said a word. The worst part was that I could feel Tiffany enjoying it. Every time I tried to set a boundary, she found a way to push it just a little further. I'd come downstairs and find her lounging in my dad's recliner like it was her personal throne, flipping through magazines while the kids destroyed the living room. If I asked them to clean up, she'd roll her eyes. They're just expressing themselves, she'd say like a smug Pinterest mom who read one article about child development and thought it made her a psychologist. But it was what happened 2 months into their stay that finally broke me. I had been out running errands, groceries, a pharmacy stop, nothing exciting. When I returned and opened my laptop, I got a blank screen and a flashing red error. My internet was down. That made no sense. I had a wired Ethernet connection set up specifically to avoid issues with our spotty Wi-Fi. I went to check the router in my room and immediately froze. The Ethernet cable had been cut, not unplugged, not chewed by a pet, cleanly snipped in half, as if someone had taken scissors and sliced right through it. My hands trembled as I picked up the two ends of the cable, the copper threads frayed and useless. I stormed downstairs, heart pounding with rage and confusion. Who did this? I demanded, holding up the cut wire like it was a smoking gun. Tiffany didn't even look up from where she was painting her nails on the coffee table. Oh, that, she said with a casual shrug. Brody was playing with the scissors earlier. He must have wandered into your room. You think this is funny? I asked, trying to stay calm. I have a deadline tomorrow. That cable was the only stable connection I had. Tiffany smiled without even pausing her brush stroke. Maybe you should lock your door if your computer stuff is so fragile. Maybe you should keep your kid from wandering around with sharp objects and destroying other people's property. That's when she stood up, her fake sweetness vanishing in an instant. Don't you dare tell me how to raise my children. Then start acting like their mother instead of an influencer who outsourced parenting. Tiffany's eyes narrowed. You have no idea what it's like to be a mom. I know what it's like to have respect for other people's space. Brody is 6, not a baby. Cutting a cable with scissors isn't an accident. It's destruction. Kyle came into the room, followed by my parents, all drawn by the raised voices. I held up the cable again. Can someone explain to me how this is acceptable? Kyle just sighed, like I was being difficult. Cass, look, I'm sorry about your internet. But Sandra's right. Kids get into stuff. You don't have kids, so you wouldn't understand. I blinked. I don't need to be a parent to know you should keep scissors away from children. Mom chimed in then, in that soft, reasonable voice she used when she didn't want to take sides. Boys his age are naturally curious. You used to get into everything when you were little. I didn't cut through someone's Ethernet cable when they were trying to work, I said, my voice sharper now. And you're all ignoring the fact that my room was entered without permission. Dad finally spoke up, though his voice didn't carry the weight I'd hoped for. It's just a wire. You can buy a new one. I stared at them, completely stunned. I was paying the bills, covering the mortgage, buying groceries, and they were siding with the woman who'd turned my bedroom into a nursery and let her son destroy my work equipment. Something inside me shifted that day. I stopped waiting for fairness. I stopped hoping for gratitude. I knew then that no one here was ever going to protect me. I would have to protect myself. From that moment forward, the house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a trap. Conversations with my parents became brief and uncomfortable. Kyle avoided me like I had the plague. Tiffany would smirk at me every time we crossed paths, like she'd won a game I didn't even know we were playing. I started spending most of my time in my room, headphones on, doing everything I could to ignore the chaos swirling around me. I worked late into the night, trying to stay ahead of deadlines and save more money. Every time Brody screamed outside my door or Tiffany laughed at my clothes, I'd think about my secret savings and the new life it was going to buy me. Then, one Friday afternoon, I got the email I'd been waiting for. A major tech company had licensed one of my back-end systems for their new SaaS rollout. The payout was enormous, almost $60,000 in one go. I sat there staring at the number for a solid minute before I let out the breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. With that deposit, my savings climbed past $240,000. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I just opened a new tab and typed out a message to Eli. Let's find me a place. I'm done waiting. Eli didn't waste time. 3 days after I sent the message, he called with something he thought I'd love. Two-bedroom condo in downtown Des Moines, he said. Modern, secure building, separate office, high ceilings, no shared walls. It's not going to last long. When I stepped into the place, I knew immediately it was mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in soft, golden light, and the floors were pale oak, clean, warm, and echoing with the promise of peace. The kitchen was sleek, and the office had a glass door and enough space for every piece of equipment I owned. The building even had a private gym and soundproof walls. Most importantly, there wasn't a child in sight. I'll take it, I told Eli before we even finished the walkthrough. The paperwork moved fast. I put down $100,000 in cash and was approved without a hitch. My credit was spotless, my income was solid, and I wasn't even using half of what I'd saved. Within 2 weeks, I had a closing date, a key in hand, and utilities scheduled under my name. But I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. I wasn't ready for the chaos I knew would follow once they realized I was leaving. I wanted my exit to be clean and untraceable. So I kept quiet, kept working, and started packing in small, careful stages. Right around the same time, my boss Jennifer called me out of the blue with an offer I hadn't expected. There's a tech conference in Phoenix in a few weeks, she said. 2 weeks long. All expenses covered. Some major companies are presenting, and I want you there. It felt like a gift from the universe. I could leave the house without questions, come back, and never have to return. 2 full weeks away from the constant noise, the tension, and Tiffany's daily microaggressions. I didn't even hesitate. I'm in, I said. When I told my parents I'd be gone on a work trip, they barely reacted. Nobody asked what the conference was about, or even when I'd be back. I suppose they assumed I'd return like I always did, tired, quiet, and compliant. They were wrong. Phoenix was exactly what I needed. My hotel room was silent, cool, and luxurious. I didn't hear a single child scream through the walls. I went to panels, talked shop with engineers from across the country, and remembered what it felt like to be taken seriously. I didn't miss home for even 1 second. And more telling than that, no one from home reached out. Not a call, not a message, not even a passive-aggressive check-in from Tiffany. 2 weeks passed in a blur of quiet mornings and long conversations with people who respected my work. When I landed back in Des Moines, I wasn't expecting a parade, but I definitely wasn't expecting what I found. The taxi pulled up to my parents' house, and I froze. My things were on the lawn. Not a box or two. Everything. Trash bags full of clothes. Storage bins bursting open with my books, computer cables, and office gear. Even my desk chair was there, tilted sideways like a corpse tossed in a ditch. For a moment, I thought I had the wrong house. But then I saw the faded sunflower welcome mat and my mom's ceramic bird planter on the porch. This was home, and they had thrown me out like garbage. I walked up the steps and knocked hard. Inside, I could hear the hum of a television and the distant thud of footsteps. A few seconds later, the door opened. All 4 of them were there. Mom, Dad, Kyle, and Tiffany. Lined up like they were expecting a delivery, not facing down the person who had kept a roof over their heads for the last 2 years. What is this? I asked, pointing at the bags on the lawn. My mom looked away, suddenly finding the floor incredibly interesting. Tiffany, of course, stepped forward with her usual smirk. We made some changes while you were gone. The kids needed more space. I blinked. So you just what? Threw my life onto the lawn. We converted your room into a playroom, she said, like it was the most reasonable decision in the world. The basement is cleaned up for you now. We even put in a lamp. A lamp. My childhood bedroom, the only space I had in the house, had been handed over to a couple of children who already had the run of the place. And I was being demoted to a damp, musty basement that flooded every spring and smelled like wet cement. Of course, Tiffany added sweetly, if you don't like the arrangement, you're welcome to find your own place. You're 31. Most people your age don't live with their parents anyway. I stared at her, then at my parents, waiting for someone, anyone, to stand up and say this wasn't okay. But no one did. They just stood there, silent, like spectators at a train wreck. Then I did something that caught even me off guard. I smiled. A full, genuine, teeth-baring smile. You know what, Tiffany? You're right. I should find my own place. I paused, then looked at Kyle. I'm curious, though. How are you planning to pay the mortgage without me? Kyle puffed out his chest. I got a new job while you were gone. Decent pay. We'll manage. Fantastic, I said, still smiling. I'm happy for you. This works out better than I expected. They didn't say anything as I turned and walked down the porch steps. I didn't even look back as the front door closed behind me. No thank you. No goodbye. Just a slammed door and 4 people who had no idea they'd just done me the biggest favor of my life. I called the moving company from the driveway, using the number I'd saved weeks ago. Hi, I need a truck and 2 movers for a small haul across town. How soon do you need them? The dispatcher asked. As soon as possible. 2 hours later, my things were loaded into the truck. It didn't take long. My life had been reduced to a few bags and boxes shoved onto the lawn like yesterday's trash. I followed the truck in my car to my new apartment, pulled into the underground garage, and stepped into the building like I was walking into the next chapter of my life. That first night, I didn't unpack. I sat on the floor in my new office with a cold drink and just stared out the window. The silence was so perfect, so unfamiliar, I almost cried. No shouting. No footsteps overhead. No Tiffany making passive digs about my wardrobe. Just me. For the first time in 2 years, I slept through the night without waking up to chaos. The next morning, I blocked every number I had from them. I canceled every bill in my name. No more mortgage payments. No more utilities. No more support. I was done. For the first time in years, I had energy again. I started taking on more projects, diving into work with a clear head and a quiet space. I joined the gym in my building, started cooking again, even went on a few dates. And the money? Without their weight on my shoulders, I was saving close to $3,000 a month. Every day, I woke up a little lighter. And for the first time in a long time, I started imagining a future that was entirely mine. I thought that was the end of it. For months, my life flowed forward without a single interruption. I'd built a sanctuary out of my apartment, surrounded myself with quiet routines and calm mornings. My bank account grew, my portfolio expanded, and I even started dating someone new, Nathan, a UX designer with a dry sense of humor and a gentle way of listening that made me feel seen instead of judged. I didn't just feel like I had moved out of that house. I felt like I had been released from a prison I didn't realize I was trapped in. I traveled for the first time in years, visited Vancouver, hiked in Colorado, and ate alone in Paris without once feeling lonely. My life was mine, finally, completely. And then, one night, everything changed. It was late, nearly 10, and I was winding down with a book and a cup of chamomile when the doorbell rang. I rarely got unannounced visitors. My building had a secure entrance and most deliveries came during the day. Curious and cautious, I looked through the peephole. And there they were. My parents. Kyle. Tiffany. All standing in the hallway of my building like they belonged there, wearing expressions that ranged from apologetic to defiant. I didn't open the door at first. I just stood there, hand on the handle, heart thumping. I'd blocked their numbers, cut off communication, made it clear I wanted no more contact. And still, here they were. I opened the door just wide enough to lean out. How did you find me? Mom looked sheepish. Shayna told us. Of course she did. I made a mental note to have a firm conversation with her about boundaries later. Tiffany didn't wait for an invitation. She brushed past me into the apartment like she owned it. Call followed, then my parents, leaving the hallway door wide open behind them. Nice place, Tiffany said, eyeing the space with thinly veiled jealousy. Must cost a fortune. I didn't respond. I was too busy trying to figure out what they were doing here. What do you want? I asked, still standing by the door. Kyle looked at the floor, his shoulders hunched. I lost my job again. 2 months ago. I nodded slowly, unsurprised. And the mortgage? I asked, glancing at my parents. Dad cleared his throat. We're behind. There's a notice. If we don't pay soon, they'll foreclose. So you thought you'd show up here, what? Ask me to move back in and bail you out? It's not like that, Mom said quickly. We thought maybe we could stay here, just until we figure things out. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. You want to move in here? I repeated. After you threw my belongings on the lawn and told me to live in the basement. That was different, Kyle said weakly. You're right, I replied. It was the moment I realized you saw me as a walking paycheck and nothing more. Mom's eyes filled with tears. Cassidy, please. We're family. You've said that 100 times. But family doesn't treat each other like this. Tiffany, who had been inspecting my kitchen like she was on a real estate tour, finally chimed in. We wouldn't be here if we weren't desperate. And whose fault is that? I snapped. You lived off me for 2 years. You disrespected me, mocked me, let your kids destroy my work equipment, and never once apologized. And now that things are falling apart, you think you're entitled to my help again. Tiffany's expression twisted. You've always been selfish. All that money and not an ounce of compassion. I have plenty of compassion for people who don't treat me like garbage. They didn't expect this. I could see it in their eyes. They had shown up expecting me to be guilt, overwhelmed, broken by their presence. Instead, I was calm, focused, and completely unwilling to bend. You all need to leave. Now. We have nowhere else to go, Mom whispered. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you decided I was disposable. They filed out slowly. Tiffany muttered something under her breath. Kyle avoided my eyes. My dad looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. Mom cried the entire way to the elevator. I shut the door and turned the deadbolt. Then I leaned against it and exhaled for what felt like 5 straight minutes. It should have been over after that, but it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, I started getting messages again, emails from strange addresses, texts from unknown numbers. Some were apologies, others were pleas. A few were threats disguised as concern. I ignored them all. 3 months later, I heard through Shayna, who had done her penance by relaying the gossip, that the house had finally been foreclosed on. My parents moved into a small apartment near the edge of town. Kyle and Tiffany had moved in with her parents, which I found particularly amusing, considering how much Tiffany used to complain about them. I felt nothing. No pity. No guilt. Just relief that I had left when I did. Things continued to get better for me. I was promoted to team lead, got flown out to London for a project, and Nathan and I became something serious. He didn't just like me, he respected me. I never had to explain my choices, justify my boundaries, or pretend to be smaller than I was. But the real twist didn't come until months later. I was sitting at my desk on a rainy afternoon, wrapping up documentation, when there was a knock at the door. Expecting a delivery, I opened it without checking. It wasn't a package. It was a man in a suit holding a briefcase and a badge. Cassidy, he asked. Yes. I'm with a private agency investigating financial fraud. I'm here about Eli. I felt the floor shift beneath me. What about him? He's under investigation. It appears he may have falsified documents related to several real estate transactions, including your condo. My heart pounded. What are you saying? You may not technically own your apartment. Everything blurred. I sat through the next 30 minutes of explanations I barely heard. Something about shell companies, faked signatures, payments redirected to offshore accounts. Eli had vanished months ago. Dozens of buyers were involved. Lawsuits were pending. I was one of many victims. When he left, I sat on the couch in silence for hours. Everything I'd built could be stripped away in court. My home, my sanctuary, the freedom I had fought tooth and nail to protect. It might not have ever belonged to me at all. That night, for the first time in a long time, I couldn't sleep. The idea of going back, not just physically, but emotionally, haunted me. I had no intention of crawling to my family for help. But for a moment, I understood the weight of desperation they'd carried. I had savings. I had resources. But I didn't have certainty anymore. And in that moment, something inside me hardened. I wouldn't be a victim. Not again. Not to Eli. Not to anyone. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Then I started planning again, not just for the battle ahead, but for the life I'd still build. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Even when people try to tear you down, even when the walls close in, you don't wait to be rescued. You start laying bricks for a new escape.